of Nicaragua. Daniel Ortega was one of the 9 commanders at the beginning after the victory of the Sandinistas. No one could have suspected he will end up becoming another dictator 40 years later. Ortega assumed the position of coordinator of the 5-person junta of national reconstruction that was composed by Daniel Ortega, by Sergio Ramirez, a very famous poet and writer in Nicaragua, Moises Hassan, Alfonso Robelo, and Violeta Barrios de Chamorro. That names mean something to you. Within a year, Alfonso Robelo and Violeta Chamorro resigned from their position when they realized they did not have any real power. In 1984, Ortega was elected president for a 6-year period, while the country was stormed by the Contra War financed by the US. Arturo Cruzon, the opposition candidate, also supported by the US, withdrew when he realized that these were not going to be real democratic elections. And in 1990, from 1990 to 1996, as part of the Esquipulas-Pisa War Accord, Ortega and the FSLN, the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, agreed to call for an early presidential election. Those were perhaps the only freest elections in our country's history. They took place with international observers from the Carter Center, along with the United Nations and the OAS, with external funding for the opposition. I want to tell you that I was there as an observer, and at the time I was doing a documentary about what was happening in Nicaragua. I was still foolishly believing that perhaps there was a hope with the Sandinistas and with Daniel Ortega. To everyone's surprise, and not to mine, because when I was in Nicaragua, I went to markets, to churches, and went to ask people when I was doing this documentary if they were going to vote for Daniel Ortega. But there was a very clever soundbite that have been given to Mrs. Chamorro, which was, your vote is secret. And when I will ask people in Nicaragua, and I will go to the markets, you know, we cannot tell you because nuestro voto es secreto, our vote is secret. And so I would try to find all kinds of surreptitious way to get them to say. And by the time I finished filming and talking to people, I was convinced that they were not, that Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas were not going to win the election. To everyone's surprise, sorry. Violeta Barrios de Chamorro won the election, but the FSLN remained the most powerful political party with control over the army, the police, and the unions. After his defeat, Ortega pronounced his famous phrase, "I will govern from below," and use his social and political forces to destabilize the Chamorro government with the strikes, demonstrations, and repeated calls for the revolutionary reconstruction of the Nicaraguan society. Daniel Ortega directed something that is called in Nicaragua La Piñata, a full-scale privatization of state property that passed into the personal hands of the FSLN leadership. This marked the first chapter of the ethical suicide of the FSLN. The Sandinista government lost their moral authority. In 1996, Ortega lost the presidential election to Arnoldo Alemán, named by Transparency International as the 9th most corrupt leader in recent history. Sadly, in Nicaragua, we have known many leaders who are corrupt and who are criminal. Ortega lost the presidential election to him, and once again, this time, he ran again in 2001 for 2006, and once again he lost the presidential election, this time against Enrique Bolaños. There was a triangle between Ortega, Alemán, and Bolaños that was formed. During his presidency, Bolaños initiated the investigation of Arnoldo Alemán, and in December 2002, he was formally charged with money laundering, embezzlement, and corruption, and in December 2003, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Between 1990 and 2007, Daniel Ortega manipulated the legal institution, organized general strike, and made the entire government again ungovernable. This marked the second chapter in Ortega's ethical suicide. In fact, many left the ranks of the Sandinista front, claiming it was no longer Sandinismo, but now Orteguismo, centered around one person and a close circle. There was something very important that took place in Nicaragua. That was the pact in 1998 between Ortega with Arnoldo Alemán. And in 1999, the agreement between them materialized into the constitutional reforms of the electoral law that were implemented in 2000. During this period, Soy America Ortega, Rosario Murillo, who is the wife of Daniel Ortega, her daughter by her first union, publicly denounced Daniel Ortega, her stepfather, for sexual abuse from the age of 9. Rosario Murillo deserted her daughter and stood by Ortega. Arnoldo Alemán, with the support of Daniel Ortega, enacted neoliberal policies. He privatized healthcare, education, and social security. So to those many liberals and progressive people throughout the world who continue to think that Daniel Ortega is that leader of the Sandinista revolution, a leftist revolutionary leader, they're completely fooling themselves by thinking that. Because Daniel Ortega, what he is an opportunist who will adapt and will incorporate policies regardless of whether they are from the left or from the right. In 2006, the Electoral Reform introduced in January 2000 as a result of the pact between Alemán and Ortega established new rules for the contending parties in the election, which allowed Ortega to win the presidency with 38% of the vote. A few months before the election, Daniel Ortega and the parliamentary group of the FSLN supported the adoption law that will prohibit abortion, even in cases of rape. This legislation repealed the law that had been in place since the presidency of Zelaya in 1893. The legislation took effect on July 2008 under Ortega presidency. Daniel Ortega assumed the presidency in January of 2007. And in 2009, the Supreme Court revoked Arnoldo Alemán's sentences of 20 years in prison. And this was, of course, the result of the pact between Alemán and Ortega, who had considerable influence over the court. Ortega began to dismantle all legal institutions. He proceeded to centralize power, achieving control over the executive, legislative, judiciary, and the Supreme Electoral Council, in addition to major municipalities and universities. He changed the constitution to permit re-election. In 2011, Ortega unconstitutional re-election was re-elected with a court ruling that violated that constitution. In 2014, Ortega reformed the constitution to allow himself to become president for life. With massive financial support from Venezuela, Ortega and family acquired most media networks and expanded their economic dominance. He was re-elected in 2016, and he pushed through a court ruling that allowed him to be president for life again. And he named his wife, Rosario Murillo, the vice president of the country. In 2018, the outbreak of protests and the order to shoot to kill. In 2018, I traveled to Nicaragua with Amnesty International. Amnesty International had prepared a report that was called Shoot to Kill, and it was to denounce the Nicaragua strategy to repress protests, where they detail some of the elements of the strategy of the Nicaraguan government. And that was to shoot, only to kill, not shoot at the legs, not shoot to stop the protester, but really to use sniper shooters to kill them. And on April of 2018, Ortega introduced a series of reforms to the social security system that led to the outbreak of protests against the government of Nicaragua. From that day, thousands of people went out to express their dissatisfaction and demanded that the state recount their proposed reform. Although Ortega did, due to the pressure exerted by the protesters, the repressive strategies implemented by the government against the protesters resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people and thousands of wounded. During this period, most of the people who died during this protest were killed at the hands of agents and paramilitary groups, as well as by the police. Amnesty International received reliable information indicating that the Nicaraguan government had used groups of armed individuals and paramilitary groups that have been named and called in other countries like El Salvador as the Death Squad, acting in coordination and with the acquiescence and tolerance of a state authorities, especially the National Police. According to this information, the government used this shock tactic with individuals as an attack strategy that hindered the subsequent identification of those responsible for human rights violation and to increase the capacity for repression. In light of the massacres, Ortega was deserted with many of his allies. The four pillars that allowed Ortega to solidify their power, a pact, and this is very important, and I don't know if many people are aware of this, that the only way that Daniel Ortega was able to remain in power until today is because of his pact with some of the wealthiest families and some of the business sector in Nicaragua. He gave them tax breaks that will make even the Republicans blush. Ortega embraced neoliberal policies, as I mentioned before. A sector of the Catholic Church, Ortega posed as a born-again Christian. He received the support of the late Cardinal Obando Bravo as a payback for his support. Ortega, as I have mentioned before, introduced the anti-abortion law, even in cases of rape. But I would like to clarify something. The church, the Catholic Church in Nicaragua, is very different today. They have been a staunch defender of the students of liberty. They have denounced Daniel Ortega, and they have paid a very high price and been persecuted by the government. And some of them, and among those is an outstanding individual, which is a bishop, who is now living in Miami because he cannot be in Nicaragua. And there are many of the priests and bishops in Nicaragua who are suffering very brutal repression and persecution. During that period, Venezuela gave tremendous financial support to Ortega with the country's oil, but the oil and money has now run out. Ortega claimed to enforce US interests in the region for a few years, And for a while, the Ortega government appeared to be supporting US interests by controlling drug trafficking and migration to the US with its security police and military. He also allowed sweatshops, neoliberal trade, and financial investment to continue to be there despite COVID-19. The brutal repression of Daniel Ortega's murderous regime against the unarmed civilian population nearly lasted for the last 3 years since that April in 2018, that have resulted in nearly 400 extrajudicial executions and thousands of wounded and missing people. And at the time, there were more than 700 prisoners charged with false accusation and the use of unspeakable torture, including sexual torture to women. And there has recently been a report that document the rape of women and men in the jails of Nicaragua. Today, we still have 109 political prisoners who are the victims of torture and mistreatment by the regime of Daniel Ortega. This strategy of repression and crimes against humanity prompted members of the US Congress to propose the bill of law S3233, Human Rights and Anti-Corruption Law of Nicaragua of 2018. And the Senate approved the law unanimously on November 27, 2018. I must say that as much as I've been very critical of Donald Trump, we have been able to obtain from members of the government and with the support of the State Department, that they have imposed 23 sanctions on some of the criminal members of the Ortega regime, including his wife, Rosario Murillo. Today, Daniel Ortega maintains power with his repressive state apparatus, the police, the riot police, the paramilitary forces, a mighty arsenal of weapons, and increasing complicity of the army. I will tell you just a few very interesting issues. For example, Putin visit Nicaragua, and to a certain degree, Nicaragua continues to receive support from the Russians and support, and as well as support of weapons. Nobody could have suspected in 1979, after the victory of the Sandinista, that Daniel Ortega will end up consolidating his power using what I said early on: corruption, tyranny, and repression. Recently in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega introduced 3 draconian laws. The Nicaraguan National Assembly, which he controls with the help of Alemán, passed a trio of draconian laws that will effectively cripple freedom of speech and expression in the country. The statutes include a hate speech law that carries a potential life sentence, an especially onerous cybercrime law, and a foreign agent law that will monitor and control individuals and organizations that receive money from abroad. All 3 provisions could be used by Ortega to punish those who raise their voices against his repressive policy, according to Amnesty International. And that is ahead of the elections next year. The hate speech law was introduced to Parliament by Vice President Rosario Murillo. And this is the translation of what she said: to address cruel, aberrant, inhumane, humiliating, and denigrating hate crimes. It's extraordinary that she will say that, which is exactly what he's using against the opposition, and punish those who use communication technology or social media platform to punish or disseminate false or distorted information likely to spread anxiety, anguish, or fear, as well as anyone who publishes false or distorted information that promotes hate and violence, endangers economic stability, public order, or health, or national security. Let me tell you a little bit about what I do with the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation. Beside the human rights work that I do in support of women's rights, of children's rights, of indigenous people, against the death penalty, I spend a lot of time um, taking, supporting the people in Nicaragua by using social media and by reporting, because the Daniel Ortega regime, what he has done is he has confiscated and he has occupied most um, of the networks, most of the radios in Nicaragua. As we speak, they're trying to confiscate the only network that remains in the country, which is Canal 12. And so what I need to do in social media is that I have to report what the people of Nicaragua who are the victim of persecution, and like the mothers of the prisoners and the poor farmers who are being summarily executed by the government, who are putting that who are denouncing on social media the crimes that are taking place in Nicaragua. The foreign agents bill, widely known as the Putin law, due to his uncanny resemblance to a law Russian passed in 2012, requires personal entities to register as a foreign agent with the Interior Ministry if they directly or indirectly receive fundings from abroad. Affected individuals and organizations could include NGO of all types, journalists working for foreign media, as well as artists or others receiving remittance from abroad who reside in the Western Hemisphere. Second poorest country, Nicaragua. This repressive law was first proposed in the late September by Ortega and Murillo, Sandinista National Liberation Front, which exercised complete control over Nicaragua's National Assembly with 71 of the 92 seats. The art newspaper quoted Emilia Young Rapacholi, the director of the Museum of Memory Against Impunity in Nicaragua, who is acutely aware of the threat posed to her institution by the proposed laws. We've been living in a state of emergency since April of 2018, when civil unrest broke out in the country. And one thing that I have not said yet is that because we had a revolution in Nicaragua, and that revolution was fought by the Sandinista um, Liberation Front, and that one of the leaders of that revolution was Daniel Ortega, the Nicaraguan people don't believe anymore, fortunately, in armed struggles, and they're not prepared to fight against but is not prepared and has no arms to fight against Daniel Ortega. Another critical voice affected by the Ortega Murillo regime's parliamentary crackdown is that of my dear friend, celebrated Nicaraguan poet, Gioconda Belli. She is also the president of PEN, Nicaragua. Belli signed on to Nicaragua's Independent Press Forum recent calls to denounce the pending law. According to her, there will be no freedom of speech possible in the country with this trio of law. One such instance of international condemnation of Nicaragua, beside the US, was the overwhelming 609 to 21 vote in the European Parliament on the 8th of October that rejected the passage of the pending laws, characterizing this as an effort to further silence critics of the government, thereby aggravating an already intolerable human rights situation. The European Parliament has also now made clear that it is ready to follow in the footstep of the US State Department and enact sanctions against the Nicaraguan government and its individual representative. And that hopefully will include President Ortega and his wife and many of the corrupt members of his government. Let me explain to some of the people who may feel that they are against imposing sanctions on the country. The sanctions that are imposed today by the US government or by the um, uh, by the Europeans is not sanctions that will impact on the lives of the people, because they are called the Magnitsky law, that are imposed on individuals who have been proven to be corrupt or who have committed crimes or who have committed serious violations of human rights. And that is what we are making an appeal, so that it is possible that the European Union, European Parliament will do that. There was an investigation that was done by an independent expert that affirmed that the government of President Ortega had committed crimes against humanity. So we're talking about serious violation of human rights in Nicaragua. And maybe I wanted to tell you a little bit about what's happening with COVID-19 in the country. Um, in April of 2018, as we know, Daniel Ortega demonstrated the world that the real criminal face they have been concealing for many years. And more than 324 people, including children, including babies, were killed by the police and the paramilitary forces. During the nonviolent insurrection in Nicaragua, Sonia Castro Gonzalez, the Minister of Health, gave orders to deny medical attention to injured protesters. And I must say to you, I was in Nicaragua in the May 2018, on the 30th of May, which is International Mother's Day in Nicaragua. There was a huge demonstration of hundreds of thousands of people to think and to remember the students who were murdered during the month of April. And during that demonstration, while I was marching myself with them, we were attacked by sniper shooters, and 16 people were murdered, and about 80 were wounded. And this was one of the most shocking experiences that I witnessed while I was in Nicaragua. During the nonviolent insurrection, Sonia Castro Gonzalez, the Minister of Health, gave orders to deny medical attention to injured protesters who were victims of the regime violent repression. She also ordered to close the door of public hospitals to wounded students. Her decision caused many of them to die. Hospital staff were under orders to report to the police and paramilitary forces the protesters who were admitted to the hospitals and who were then removed, and many resulted in forced disappearances. Since then, anyone from the opposition can be denied medical treatment within the health unit. The Ministry of Health threatened healthcare workers, firing more than 400 doctors and healthcare workers whenever they decided to honor their Hippocratic oath to give medical care to anyone without discrimination. The Ortega regime has ignored the gravity of the coronavirus pandemic, and they have failed to fulfill the constitution that the government's duty is to protect the life, health, and well-being of their citizens. What I can tell you about what is happening at the moment is that the Ortega regime have distorted and disguised the real information to the population, hiding the danger and risk of the disease, not introducing protection and preventive measures. They have insisted in promoting conglomeration and activities contrary to the prevention measures recommended by the WHO. Nicaragua is one of the few countries in the world that has not imposed lockdowns or closed public schools and universities. No information has been provided to the population about the risk of this deadly disease. A false normality has been promoted, preventing the population from making an adequate assessment of their individual, family, and community risks. Virulent attacks have been launched against the science and the medical personnel, demanding that the regime introduce preventive measures. I can tell you that some of the information regarding the coronavirus that I have been denouncing in various um, conference that we had on Zoom have been given to me by doctors that are now being persecuted and that have at the doorsteps the paramilitary waiting for them, threatening with being arrested. Tests for the virus are not available and not carried out in Nicaragua, and the information of those few that are carried out are kept silent. Activities and agglomeration that had favor community contagion since the pandemic started have been promoted. In fact, yesterday, Rosario Murillo, the vice president and accomplice of Daniel Ortega, the dictatorship, we have lots of events, concluding with the question of Esteli, which is a town which is famous because people come from all over the country. And on December 20, a sports party, rhythmic band, comparsas, which is a dance in Nicaragua, shopping nights, artists and culture, congratulations, and heroic Esteli. In Nicaragua, we have reported 18 times more disease than what the government says. In fact, up to the month of August, almost 8,000 people died due to the epidemic. Medical personnel have been persecuted, threatened, and harassed for when they disclose that they are infected with the disease as well, that more than 100 medical personnel have died in Nicaragua because they have been denied to have PPE, personal protective equipment. So you can just imagine how sad is the situation of the people of Nicaragua, where the contagion of the coronavirus continues to spread. Nicaragua is now a police state. Protests ban or violently attack. Some kill, many maim. The Sandinista revolution has been betrayed. Ortega is continue to repress the country, and he's more like Maduro or Mugabe. I urge you all to please help us and to please pay attention to what is happening in Nicaragua. I make an appeal to the US government, to Canada, France, and Germany, and the Latin American countries to condemn and impose sanctions on the Ortega regime. He's using state terrorism against peaceful demonstrators, and that I can see and I continue to receive information of summary execution of poor farmers in remote places in Nicaragua, and continue to hear the torture and the abuse that the Ortega regime is committing against the people of Nicaragua, against the church, against students, against workers, against women, against the press, and I guess, as I said, against the poor farmers. Thank you very much. I hope it was not too dry and too long, and that I have been able to convey to you a picture of Nicaragua, even though I have not tell you half of or 1/3 of really of what is happening there. I feel sometimes at lost, because I don't know what else I can do except continue to denounce, continues to call upon the international community, and continue to inform people about the situation of the people of Nicaragua.
Thank you, Bianca. There was a question from Janice. If she will unmute herself. You had your hand up, Janice? Hello?
I was trying to
Okay.
unmute myself. I'm not used to that.
Okay.
I want to know where her foundation is actually located. Is it in the United States or elsewhere?
My foundation is located in the UK.
Oh,
because-
okay.
Yes, because that's where I live,
Mhm.
and I am a British citizen as well as a Nicaraguan citizen.
Very good. Well, you've done a wonderful job on giving us a lot of information. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here and for listening to me.
Bianca, is there anything that people in America can do to assist the people of Nicaragua?
Yes, you know, we recently had two terrible hurricanes, um, Eta and Iota, that devastated and left a trail of death and destruction in Nicaragua and affected many of the Central American countries, including was devastating for Honduras. And the government has not been very generous in helping the people in the Atlantic coast. In fact, in the Atlantic coast, you have some of the indigenous and some of the Black citizens who live in the country. And, and there is persecution towards the indigenous population and to some of the populations in that part of the world. Not only has he failed to provide the aid that the people needed, but he prevent and he prevent people who want to help and to bring help to them. So Nicaraguans have organized, and through the church, of course, which is one of the reliable uh, uh, ways of getting help to Nicaragua, to donate so that the help will go to those people who were victim of the hurricane. And
Is the
yes,
is the Catholic Church in the United States helping the Catholic Church in Nicaragua?
to be quite honest, I don't really know. But it will be wonderful if it was possible to make an appeal to the Catholic Church in the United States to help the church in Nicaragua, especially not only to donate to, you know, for the people of Nicaragua, but because uh, the, the Catholic Church is really um, undergoing a terrible persecution by the regime of Daniel Ortega, and they have um, desecrated churches in ways that is horrific. They have entered inside the churches with the death squads and continuously threaten priests and bishops. And I was talking and I said about my very dear friend, um, who is the Bishop Baez, Silvio Baez, who is now in Miami, and who is an outstanding individual, and who, because he is such an eloquent um, and wise man, has been forced, because there have been so many threats to his life, to have been forced, and the Pope asked him to leave the country.
Do you think that a new administration in the United States will be able to do anything to help the Nicaraguans, or do you think they'll be willing to do that?
Did you say the Catholic Church?
No. A new administration in the United
Yes,
States in January.
absolutely. I have no doubts that that president, because for me he's President Biden, and Vice President Harris will continue to denounce the Ortega regime, and hopefully they will continue to give support to the people of Nicaragua and impose more sanctions and be vocal against it. And one of the things that I like to say to people who ask me, when I was asking why would I appeal to the US government to support the people of Nicaragua, is that Nicaragua is a very small country. We don't have petrol, we don't have oil. So the idea that the United States want to invade or intervene in Nicaragua is not realistic. I mean, they may have other interests, but truly, I mean, we are a very poor country with such so much upheaval, and that I don't think that the American administrations would be interested. Many Nicaraguans, I'm sad to say, were supportive, who live in the United States, were supportive of Donald Trump because, and Nicaraguans and Venezuelans and Cuban exile, because they felt that perhaps President Biden wasn't going to support them, and that was not, that he was, because of these false accusations that have been made that they are leftist and communist and socialist, that these people probably thought that maybe they will be, that they will be supportive of Ortega, of Maduro, and of the government in Cuba, which is completely absurd and will not happen.
I just want to have one other question. Can you just tell us what your foundation does in terms of trying to eliminate the death penalty and also in trying to eliminate the trafficking of children?
Yes, you know that I have more than one hat. Beside being the founder and president of the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, I am Council of Europe Goodwill Ambassador for the abolition of the death penalty. Therefore, I personally have worked, and I have even witnessed the execution of an innocent man in Texas, while it was Governor Bush, George Bush, was um, uh, uh, was uh, was in power as a governor, and have worked supporting many cases of people in death row. And as I just mentioned to you, how I feel so upset to think that there was not much that I could do this time. I put many tweets denouncing, the execution of that will take place tonight, and there are 8 more executions, including a woman. But I hope that perhaps a religious group that is close to Donald Trump could maybe intervene and have some influence on him to make him think that the death penalty is what I could have said, is biased, is racist, and that the people that are executed are the poor, those who cannot afford an adequate legal counsel, those who are a member of a minority, and in general, the people that are quite often, and as you know, there's been many that have been proven because of the DNA, proven to be innocent, and who was saved at the last minute. But of course, you know that many were executed that were innocent in the United States and in other countries. I mean, the death penalty is brutal and inhuman, and it should be abolished everywhere.
And is the foundation doing anything about the trafficking of children?
The foundation is doing denouncing and has campaigned against the trafficking of children. But to be quite honest, I mean, I work in support of children, but we don't, that is not the main issue. We work with women, with children, in developing countries, with indigenous people, and the death penalty. And as well, the foundation has a large focus on fighting against climate change for many, many years. And I have been an outspoken in support of indigenous people and the important role that they play in protecting the rainforest. And sadly, at the moment, indigenous people are suffering terribly in many countries, including in Brazil, because the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, is affecting in a devastating way indigenous people, and many of them are perishing and dying from COVID-19.
Thank you, Bianca.
Anybody else with a question? comment?
Mhm.
Bianca, I want to thank you very much for participating. I know the Episcopal Church has spoken out vehemently against the death penalty in this country. Unfortunately, it falls on deaf ears. For people that claim to be pro-life, the death penalty is not seen as something that is part of it. They're actually pro-birth, and that's about it. We forget the children after they are born, and that's one of the sins of our country. And that's one of the things that we try our best to alleviate. I'm very proud of the people here at St. Luke's who really do a lot with what is called the Retreat, which is a center for women and children who are in domestic abuse situations, to help them find a new life and escaping that abuse. So we work very intensely with the Retreat out here in the East End of Long Island. So I thank you for what you do. In my profession, I'd say for preaching the gospel. In some way that's exactly what it is how do we set people free? And in 1975, I was in Nicaragua for a month. I was with the Misioneros del Sagrado Corazón at the time. I was in the Catholic seminary at the time, and our community had some of the smaller villages up in the mountains, and I don't remember their names. It's 40 years ago.
Maybe
But
Ortega.
two of our priests were killed by the right wing. They had gone up to say mass, and as they were going up to the village, they noticed no one was around. Everyone had been herded out. Then the roads were closed behind them, and they both had at least 100 bullet wounds in their bodies. So I appreciate what you're saying.
Let me thank you for inviting me to speak. You know, I lived for many years in the US. I spent a lot of time in Long Island. I missed a lot to be in the Hamptons. I hope that one day I will be able to travel again. I have been shielding, as they say here, or in quarantine for 9 months because I am classified as a vulnerable person by the NHS or the National Health in the UK, and it means a lot to me to be able to be talking to you. It makes me feel that I'm a little bit there, that a little bit of myself is there with you, and it's wonderful to hear that you were in Nicaragua, and I'm very sorry to hear that your the priests were killed, and I urge you to think about the Catholic priests and bishops who are in Nicaragua, who are risking their lives every day.
Sí, cómo no. Y
Muchas
gracias. Y Dios te bendiga.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Bianca. I'm going to end the meeting at this point, so if you all want to start clicking off, maybe Jeffrey and Bianca might want to talk, so I'll let them do that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye, and thank you for being present and listening to me.
Está bien.
God bless you.